Hey guys, how you doing? Luna here with a new video. Welcome back to the channel. Today I'm really excited because I bring you a brand new tier list. This time we're ranking the discography of one of the most legendary bands to come out of New York City. We're talking about The Strokes. One of the weirdest discographies out there, definitely. We have 26 years of activity, I believe, and still we only have 6 albums to review. For that reason, I don't really want to waste too much time. There's not a lot to say about The Strokes that hasn't already been said. One of the most influential bands of the 2000s. A lot of people from the alternative rock scene owe their inspiration to the Strokes and to the album they released, especially in the early 2000s. So because I know how much people love the Strokes, I would like to have your own opinion on my tier list. I want you to also do your own little list in the comments below so we can all check it out and see your opinion on the band. And with that being said, let's go on with the first album. Is This It, released in 2001. And honestly, what can I say about this album? Honestly, one of the most amazing listens of the 2000s, my personal favorite album from the year 2001. Everyone knows the legend of this album and how much it influenced the entirety of the alternative rock and indie rock scene. If you see people like the Arctic Monkeys, Franz Ferdinand, and the Killers, they all talk about this album as their main source of inspiration to make music, which speaks volumes to the legacy of this album. And the album itself, when we're talking about the quality of the record, is one of the most solid set of tracks to in the 2000s. Every single song in here is amazing. Even though they use a similar sound palette, they have a different approach to songwriting in each and every single one of the tracks, which makes the album feel unique. You have some of the band's greatest tracks like Last Night, Hard to Explain, Someday, Summer, Barely Legal, New York City Cops, depending on which version of the album you're listening to. But talking about the highlights of this album is just basically a decoration, because every single song in here plays around the same level of quality, which is one of the greatest things about this album. When you talk about the best track from the album and the least memorable track from the album, they're both incredible and they're both as enjoyable as every other song in this album. You have Julian with his typical Telephone-esque sounding performance. You have the distorted guitars. You have the incredibly amazing rhythmic and fast-paced drumming. Everything that reflects their post-punk influences. It's just an amazing album overall, and I'm gonna put it in the S tier without a doubt. One of the greatest albums ever made, and my personal favorite from the band. However, it is not the only album they made using this formula, because they went on to release Room on Fire on 2003. Personally, I think that people villainize this album way too much, even though I know this album is also critically acclaimed and loved by the fans. A lot of people seem to say that this is just a bunch of B-sides from Is This It, and honestly, I think that doesn't make the album justice at all, because this album, even though again it is really similar, I do understand where the lack of originality comment comes from. I believe that the tracks are way more romantic and moody, way more emotionally intense in this record. I feel like Julian's performance has matured quite a lot in every single one of this songs. The only real problem I have with this album, and the only reason why I'm willing to admit that this album is not as good as Is This It, is because even though in the very first album you also have a mixing problem with the vocals, because sometimes you can't really understand what Julian is saying. I'm pretty sure it was on purpose. I know that it's kind of like the point of alternative rock to make something that's non-conventional. However, when I don't understand the lyrics, when I don't know what they're saying, that's definitely a problem, no matter if that was actually the intention. And that problem intensifies and also gets slightly fixed in Room on Fire, because in tracks like Automatic Stop and Reptilia, you can perfectly tell what Julian is saying in some parts of the song, but then when you go to a chorus, everything goes to shit. The same thing with songs like You Talk Way Too Much. I can barely understand what he's saying during most of the track. You also have songs like Under Control, 1251, The End Has No End, being incredible tracks and great representations of the band's peak in terms of songwriting. Pretty much, if you like Is This It, you should like Room on Fire. Both albums are around the same, in terms of quality. I don't really understand why so many people seem to believe that songs in Room on Fire are B-sides. They can't be considered B-sides when they're so good, and for that reason, this album goes straight to the S tier as well. However, my love story with the band kind of ended with Room on Fire, to be honest, because we have First Impressions of Earth, released in 2005, 2006, depending on the country you're from. It's hard to rank this album, honestly, because I do enjoy quite a few tracks from this record. The problem is that as a listen, I think this is the most tacky and, just insufferable album the Strokes have to offer, because you do have a pretty good first quarter of the album. You have the best songs in the beginning, for example, You Only Live Once, Juice Box, which is my personal favorite Strokes song. You also have Heart in a Cage, and then you have songs like Ask Me Anything in the middle part of the album, songs that kind of use a different instrumental palette and hint toward what the band wanted to do in the future with records like Angles and Come Down Machine, which we'll be talking about in a minute. The main problem with this record is the fact that it's almost an hour long and it really has no instrumental changes or pace changes to offer. Therefore, it makes the listen sound incredibly boring and just it's almost like a chore to listen to the rest of the album after you're past the first 4 tracks. You don't really want to be there anymore. I can definitely listen to this album on a car ride if it's too long or whatever, but actually sitting down and listening to the album, it's incredibly taxing on my mental health, and for that reason I have to put this record on the D tier. I think they ran out of ideas with this album. I would very much prefer for them to release the songs in this record, the best one as singles, and went on to do whatever they did with Angles, instead of releasing so many songs that are just clearly filler and kind of stain the legacy of the band's early run. I know that a lot of people have love for this album. I know a lot of people say that this album follows the same formula, so we kind of have to like it, because if we don't, we have no real basis to say that this album is bad. But in my opinion, I just don't really enjoy it, and I've explained my reasons why I don't enjoy it. The guitars sound more distorted than ever. They sound heavier than ever too. The vocals are uninspired as hell, and obviously Julian lost control of a lot of his vocals in this album. D tier for me. I don't like this album at all. The only reason why I'm not putting it in the E tier is because of the good songs I mentioned this album has. Now we go to Angles, and as I said before, I feel like the reason why First Impressions of Earth failed is because they ran out of ideas. So I do appreciate the fact that in Angles they try to go for something new. This album, personally for me, I think that it would have been way better if they actually committed to a full left turn. If they left everything the band was before this album behind and totally committed to this new 80s-ish type of sound they wanted to adopt, I personally think this album could have gone way better. However, they weren't willing to let go yet, and in my opinion, that makes the album lack a lot of identity, because you can see it in the first track of the record, Machu Picchu, where the band has this new dance pop style of instrumentation, and then in the chorus it goes back to rock music in a really distorted version of Rock 2, which is a total contrast to the rest of the instrumentation. It doesn't really sound as good. Julian's vocals that are echoed and more stylish now in this album don't really match that well with this sort of instrumentation, which makes the album feel so confusing. You have good songs in here. Again, Undercover of Darkness is a great song. Taken for a Fool, Call Me Back. I think the songs are good, and I would say 50-50 when it comes to this album. 50% is enjoyable, listenable, and overall just good. And then the other 50 is just confusing and not really that rewarding. So for that reason, I'm going to put this album in the C tier. I don't really have a lot to say, because even though I think this album is really important because it kind of defined what the band's future was going to look like, and it was a pretty big shock when we listened to what Julian was doing on this album. But I feel like, especially when you listen to an album like The New Abnormal, which is an album where the band embraced the new sound and completely lets go of everything the band was before that, I feel like this album becomes even more unlistenable, or even less enjoyable. It's the right word, I think, because you can tell that still you find ghosts of the band's past in this record that don't really let this new style shine through. Also, Julian's vocals in this album are terrible for the most part. They sound uncontrolled. It sounds like he doesn't really know what he's doing. You don't really feel like he's emotionally invested in a lot of these tracks, especially in the song Undercover of Darkness. I think that this high-pitched style of singing is not really for Julian, or was not at the time, because in a lot of the songs from The New Abnormal it sounds pretty good, but in this one, no, he definitely needed to work in his falsetto a lot more. So for that reason, goes for C tier, and the only reason why it's C tier is because I enjoy kind of like half of this record. However, the band didn't really abandon abandon this new style of sound they were trying to use, because Calm Down Machine from 2013 uses the same sort of formula of sorts. You know, it's not exactly the same. In here, there's a lot more rock packed into the songs, and I personally believe, you know, this album is clearly a joke album. The only reason why it was released is to get out of the RCA deal, which makes the album's marketing to be basically zero. You know, you don't even have a proper album cover, and I think that the album's quality suffers a lot from the fact that people don't even consider this album to be a proper release. But when you actually only focus on the quality of the songs and how well they connect with each other, this album is definitely better than First Impressions of Earth, and it's far from being the worst the band has to offer, in my opinion. Like, obviously you have the same identity crisis you find in Angles. This album suffers from the same problems that, you know, Angles suffers from, but in here I think that Julian's performance is a bit more mature. I think he kind of adapted to this new sound a lot better, thanks to that you have songs like Welcome to Japan, 80s Come Down Machine, Slow Animals, and also Call It Fate, Call It Karma, one of the most beautiful songs the band has to offer. Overall, I think this album is not really as bad as many people, you know, say it is. I think that the main reason why a lot of people seem to think this album is a piece of shit is because of the shady nature of the album's release and, you know, the reason why it was released. But, you know, when you actually only focus on the music, this album is pretty acceptable. Now let's talk about the final album, and this is an album I'm really happy to talk about because it, you know, it's a happy ending for me. The New Abnormal from 2020 is the greatest album by the band since the Room on Fire released in 2003. And the reason why I'm saying that is because finally with this record, they definitely committed to this new style they were trying to do ever since Angles, and even some songs in First Impressions of Earth. Every single song on this album is beautiful, is moody, there's no distorted guitars anywhere, you know, there's no ghosts from the band's old style in this record, which makes it feel so fresh and so new. I feel like, you know, some of the tracks in this record feel so emotionally intense to the point where it's almost hard to believe it's the same people who made Is This It and Room on Fire. It feels like you're listening to The Strokes, especially when you look at songs like Bad Decisions and Ode to the Mets. That definitely you can tell that it's the same band, but it's like it's a more mature and emotionally intense version of the band. And for that reason, you have songs like At the Door, Ode to the Mets, like I said before, Eternal Summer, a great track, and one of my favorite Strokes songs ever, Selfless. In my opinion, the track list from this album is incredibly tight too. So obviously, if I, you know, feel so good about this album, I'm definitely going to put it in the S tier, right? Not really, because I feel like this album has one major issue. A lot of the tracks in this album are kind of dragged a little bit. I feel like the album shouldn't be as long as it is. It's not that I think that 45 minutes is a really long runtime, but Eternal Summer has no business being so long. Ode to the Mets have no business being so long. I can understand why At the Door is as long as it is, but again, like, not every single track on this record had to go past 3 minutes. You know, I think that the band kind of overdid it a little bit with some of the songs in this album, which can make the listen a little bit tacky and sometimes boring. Only for that reason, I'm gonna put this album in the A tier, but definitely the high end of the A tier, and depending on the day, I may put this album in the S tier because I really do like this album as much as I'm saying. I don't know, man. I just feel like it makes me feel so excited for the future of the band, you know. And when an album actually makes you look forward to new music and it makes you feel like you're at the beginning of a new journey for the band, you can tell that it's a great album. You can definitely appreciate the album's legacy as a new beginning for the band. And for that reason, I feel like The New Abnormal is definitely a happy ending if it happens to be the last album the band ever releases. That'll be it for today's tier list. I have to say I'm really happy with the way this tier list is looking like. It really does represent my journey with the band, you know, how hyped I was when I first listened to those first 2 albums, how disappointed I felt when I listened to, you know, First Impressions of Earth, and then I started to pick up the band started to pick up my interest back again with Angles and Calm Down Machine, and my happiness when I heard The New Abnormal and I realized that one of my favorite bands still has it and will probably release some more amazing music in the future. But I want to know what you guys think. I want to know what your own list is going to look like, you guys, so feel free to leave me your own list down below in the comments. Also, I'm open to critics. I'm open even to insults because I know that's how you guys guys like to communicate sometimes. Let me know what you think on First Impressions of Earth. In my opinion, is one of the most interesting releases by the band because a lot of people hate it, a lot of people love it. Me personally, as you can tell, I'm not a really big fan of the album, so I want to know what you guys think about that record. Also, if you want me to rank any other discographies, if you want me to review a certain album or a certain song, go ahead and leave all those recommendations down below in the comments. I truly hope that you enjoyed today's video. If you did, go ahead and leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any other videos that I upload. With that being said, once again, I hope that you enjoyed, and I hope that I can see you guys soon with a new video. But until then, bye.